la recording. Bene, grazie a tutti di essere qua. Io vi parlo da Toronto e Paolo Benzi, che con me ospita questo webinar, vi parla da Montreal. I hope our English-speaking panelists will bear with us while we do this first 10 minutes of introduction to this webinar, which will be in Italian. Grazie ancora e io volevo soltanto ricordare che questa iniziativa è un'iniziativa dell'ICE o ITA, che è la stessa cosa, l'agenzia del governo italiano che promuove gli investimenti, l'azione di investimenti e soprattutto il commercio all'estero, e che ha anche queste attività sulla procurement internazionale che fanno parte delle varie modalità, insomma, di vendere, di essere presenti sui mercati esteri. Qui in Canada, grazie al trattato fra l'Unione Europea e Canada, il cosiddetto CETA o SITA, come si pronuncia qui nei paesi anglofoni, abbiamo una piattaforma particolare, di particolare rilevanza per poter entrare nel procurement canadese, e quindi per questo il governo italiano ha voluto poi costituire un'unità che è impersonata da Paolo Benzi a Montreal, ma che naturalmente è seguita sia qui da Toronto e anche da ICE Roma, insomma, dai colleghi di ICE Roma che stanno dietro le quinte, ma sono molto ben presenti e molto supportive di questi nostri sforzi, e per incrementare appunto la presenza delle imprese italiane in questa modalità di internazionalizzazione. La struttura è attiva da 4 anni, abbiamo fatto un piccolo periodo di pausa, ma siamo ripartiti adesso alla grande e abbiamo dato all'attività una cadenza trimestrale, nel senso che ogni 3 mesi cerchiamo di occuparci di un settore nuovo, ma più in dettaglio, ma naturalmente siamo qua per tutto e per tutti, insomma, in quest'ambito in maniera continuativa. Io mi fermo qui, lascio la parola a Paolo e poi ritornerò per le conclusioni, dove vi racconteremo un pochino che cosa possiamo fare concretamente insieme e quindi come andare avanti e quali sono i prossimi passi. Grazie Paolo, a te.
Grazie Marco. Mi scuso se le presentazioni saranno leggermente rallentate, abbiamo qualche problema tecnico di comunicazione questa mattina a Montreal. Comunque spero che vediate la proiezione. Allora, l'osservatorio gare e appalti è stato istituito nel 2018 a Montreal in seguito all'entrata in vigore del CETA, quindi come sapete l'accordo sul commercio tra Canada e Unione Europea, la quale ha un capitolo specifico sugli appalti. Questo ha permesso, in base alle disposizioni commerciali precedenti tra il Canada e l'Europa, di ampliare l'accessibilità alle imprese europee agli appalti pubblici non solo federali ma anche provinciali e municipali. Avremo la presenza di 4 graditi ospiti oggi che daranno la loro testimonianza in diversi settori, in particolare delle infrastrutture sanitarie e dei dispositivi medicali. Li presenteremo brevemente. John Casola è il Chief Investment Officer della Canada Infrastructure Bank. La Canada Infrastructure Bank è un organismo pubblico canadese che si occupa di finanziare grandi progetti sul territorio canadese, in particolare nel campo dell'energia, delle infrastrutture e dei trasporti, e anche ovviamente della retrofit dei buildings, quindi recupero energetico. Martine Baudouin è consigliera strategica di MedTech Canada. MedTech Canada è un organismo che raduna i produttori e distributori di dispositivi medici in Canada. Taslim Vastani è la direttrice del Procurement del Sinai Health System a Toronto, quindi un organismo che si occupa di fornire gli ospedali di tutte le attrezzature, delle materiali, dalla carta e della stampante fino al dispositivo medico, quindi ci darà la sua esperienza in Ontario. E finalmente Mark Orge da Toronto si occupa dell'asset management, quindi la gestione dei fabbricati, quindi anche ospedali, da parte di Altus Group. Il Canada, come sapete, è un paese abbastanza grande, meno densamente popolato dell'Italia. Tutti i numeri che vi condividiamo sono già numeri noti, quindi abbiamo un territorio che copre 10 province e 3 territori, con una popolazione circa la metà di quella italiana. Lo scambio commerciale tra Canada e Italia è in favore dell'Italia, quindi nell'anno scorso compiuto abbiamo circa 10 miliardi di dollari canadesi importati contro quasi 3 esportati, quindi a favore dell'Italia. Il settore biomedicale, non l'ho riportato in questa slide, comunque è intorno al 5-6% dello scambio commerciale. Parlando di appalti pubblici, rappresentano, dal punto di vista del budget federale, il 13% circa del prodotto interno lordo. Quindi il Canada si posiziona in modo superiore alla media internazionale. Un attimo solo, che devo verificare la qualità. Vedete bene le slide o sono leggermente in bassa qualità?
Vediamo bene, forse puoi allargare un po' con la modalità presentazione.
Non riesco ad andare in modalità tutto schermo perché ho la connessione lenta, non riesco a spostare niente.
No, d'accordo.
Un attimo solo. Non cambio niente. Bene, poi che cosa ha cambiato il CETA? Ve l'ho detto prima, ve l'ho accennato, che ha allargato la possibilità alle province e alle municipalità di offrire i propri appalti pubblici. Ricordiamo che tutte le forniture destinate al settore pubblico devono passare sotto i bandi di appalto pubblico, appunto, sopra un montante, a un valore di circa $25.000. Questo vale per gli appalti locali. Quando parliamo di appalti internazionali, quindi con l'applicabilità anche dell'accordo CETA, ovviamente le soglie di valore sono diverse, le vedremo tra poco. Quindi per dare un'idea, il Canada ha un frazionamento del finanziamento pubblico degli appalti locale molto elevato, cioè le province finanziano in modo molto più importante rispetto al federale e questo in modo superiore rispetto a circa l'87-88% provinciale rispetto al federale, rispetto alla media internazionale. Quindi l'applicabilità del CETA, sulle norme si trovano tutti i requisiti per verificare se è applicabile o meno, quindi a seconda del settore. C'è una soglia di valore dell'appalto affinché il CETA sia applicabile, quindi se prendiamo le entità governative centrali e subcentrali, vuol dire quelle federali o quelle dislocate nelle varie province, i beni e servizi si assestano su dei valori di $365.000 e la costruzione dai $9.100.000 in poi. Ci sono delle esclusioni per cui il CETA non è applicabile, quindi per esempio la sicurezza e difesa nazionale, oppure certi prodotti agricoli per il sostegno programmi di alimentazione umana, materiale radiotelevisivo, eccetera. I tipi di gare che il governo federale può istituire ovviamente sono a vari livelli e livelli successivi. C'è una manifestazione di interesse, segue una richiesta di qualificazione per arrivare a una short list di fornitori, dopodiché una richiesta di proposizione, quindi di offerta. Per gli acquisti più continuativi ci possono essere delle richieste permanenti o accordi di approvvigionamento a più lungo termine. I settori che noi monitoriamo, un attimo solo che ho la connessione lenta, ecco qua. I settori che monitoriamo sono in diverse categorie, principalmente trasporti e transit, nei quali ci sono enormi investimenti nelle infrastrutture, abbiamo anche infrastrutture nell'edilizia, nelle tecnologie, in energia e nel trattamento delle acque. In particolare oggi vedremo il settore ospedaliero che riguarda appunto l'healthcare. Per quanto riguarda la distribuzione dei grandi progetti di infrastruttura, l'Ontario e il Quebec ammontano a quantità di investimenti superiore rispetto al resto del Canada, come vediamo in questo grafico, e poi vi li do velocemente, ma vi faremo vedere la presentazione. La costruzione rappresenta il 14% degli investimenti. Il tema di oggi riguarda appunto le infrastrutture della sanità, che possiamo suddividere in 4 segmenti. Il primo è il contenitore, cioè l'ospedale, l'infrastruttura di costruzione che comunque segue in tutta la vita dell'opera, in particolare anche per quello che riguarda la manutenzione. Poi abbiamo tutti gli equipaggiamenti interni, quindi impianti, arredi e accessori interni, successivamente gli equipaggiamenti e i dispositivi medici e per ultimo i disposable o i consumabili. Quindi per le imprese italiane che forniscono o vorranno fornire materiali, equipaggiamenti o dispositivi, in particolare ci concentreremo sul terzo e quarto segmento. Finalmente abbiamo alcuni esempi di ospedali, di gare di appalto di ospedali, qui l'ospedale di Lachine in prossimità di Montreal che ha un progetto di espansione, come del resto un nuovo ospedale nel Surrey in British Columbia, questo è un ospedale nuovo, di nuova concezione, e finalmente a Montreal un nuovo stabilimento di produzione di vaccini di Moderna che inizierà la costruzione l'anno prossimo. Bene, passo la parola ai 4 relatori, cominciamo con John Casola. John, se vuoi condividere la presentazione, grazie. Thank you. La presentazione dei 4 relatori sarà in inglese.
Hi, can you hear me, Paolo?
Yes.
Okay, you can't see me though. Is that right?
Yeah,
it's telling me you're blocking the video on your end. That's what it's telling me.
Okay, do you want I share your presentation?
No, that's okay. If you're fine with me not being on screen, that's fine.
Okay, you can share your own presentation.
I'll share it in a second. So I want to say to start, buongiorno a tutti e grazie di invitarmi qui.
Put your video on.
What's that?
Your video.
It's on? Okay, there we go.
Now it's on.
Okay,
thank you.
I see it now. È un piacere di partecipare oggi qui. And now that I've lulled you into a false sense that I can actually speak Italian, I will switch to English because that's as far as my Italian proficiency goes. I was kidding with Paolo. I can do this presentation in dialetto siciliano, but I don't think that's going to be very effective for anybody on the line. So look, very quickly, because we only have a few minutes and we're running late, Paolo asked me to join here today to talk about 2 things. I'm going to give you a very quick high-level overview of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And then secondly, he asked me to say a few words about our building retrofits program, specifically to try to keep with the theme today of healthcare and healthcare buildings and so on. So let me just try and throw this up on the screen very quickly. I have a presentation. Can you see that, Paolo?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So again, I'll go very, very quickly. I know we have 3 other great panelists you'll want to hear from as well. So what is the CIB? It is a federal government crown corporation. It was established in 2018. And it was established really on the premise that neither the private sector nor the public sector alone can close the massive infrastructure gap that we have in this country. We need a lot of investment in infrastructure. Neither can do it alone, so they created us. So what do we do? We invest in infrastructure projects in our 5 priority sectors. I'll go over those in a minute. We're a very unique organization. We don't do grants. What we do is truly invest in projects. We can play anywhere in the capital structure. We can do equity in a project. We can do debt, or we can do subordinated debt. We have a large amount of flexibility in terms of how we structure deals. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention, we have 35 billion Canadian dollars to spend on infrastructure in our area. So it's a substantial amount of money that we have to try and address this money. The other unique feature about the Canada Infrastructure Bank is that we need private capital along with us in every deal. As I started to say, we can't do it alone. The theory is that we do it together. And so we need for any project to go forward to have some amount of private capital alongside us. The way I like to describe what we do, if you remember only two words, only two of what everything I say today, remember the words gap filler. There must be a gap in the project that's preventing it from getting done in the market by conventional financing methods, by the project sponsors, building owners, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where we help, whether it's a risk profile that lenders won't lend to, or whether it's just the economics don't work and they wouldn't provide a market return, a reasonable market return for the infrastructure owners. So that's where we can come in with lower cost capital if it's necessary, or market rate capital because they can't get it in the market. It's not a question of the economics would work if they could get a loan on market terms. They just can't get the loan at all. So we're very flexible about what we do there. Here are the priority sectors that we're involved in. You'll see public transit, clean power, and clean power's generation, transmission, and storage, broadband, trade and transportation, and you'll see green infrastructure, and save that one for last. That includes energy transition as well as our energy efficient retrofits program that we established. Paulo, I'm assuming you'll distribute these slides so people will have them, or people will have access to them. Okay, good. So I won't need to. I'm not going to dwell. I'm going to pick my points here and not go over them in detail, given that we have just a few minutes left. Okay, so you'll have these and you can look at those. So that's essentially what the bank is. We function as a very commercial way. I have the privilege of sitting atop an investments team of 50 investments professionals, and they all come from the private sector. They're all from pension funds, from private equity, from the big banks. They all are professionals who do deals. So it's a very disciplined approach. All right, let's talk about the Building Retrofits Initiative. I think this fits in well with the theme today, because one of our first building retrofits initiatives that we did was actually with Toronto Western Hospital here in the city, one of the very large hospitals in Canada and in Toronto. You can go to our website, by the way, at the CIB website, and it'll give you more details on the deal. So I'm not gonna dwell on it here. But essentially, our mission is to encourage the reduction of GHG emissions. If you look at what the biggest contributors to GHG emissions are in Canada, about 38% of all emissions in Canada come from buildings. That surprised me. I knew it was a lot, but I didn't realize it was that high when I heard those numbers. And so, while there tend to be smallish investments of, they're not the $1 billion, what people would think of as transformational infrastructure investments, we needed to find a way to catalyze all the activity in the market. And the way we've done that is to develop this initiative. So what the initiative basically is the CIB works with private and public sector real estate owners and other market participants to modernize and improve energy efficiency of buildings. So we can provide low cost, long-term capital to help with that transition. One of the very interesting things about our program, which you'll see, is that we incentivize deeper retrofits. So the deeper you go, the more energy savings, the better interest rate you will get from us. And it starts from a position of, in order to qualify for CIB funding, you need a minimum of a 30% reduction in emissions. And so that qualifies you, and that gets you our basic rate, which is still concessional. It's still a very good rate compared to what you could borrow in the market. But if you go to 40%, it gets better by a percent. And if you go to 50% plus, it gets even better. And so we structured it in a way that really incentivizes the market to do that. Here's the way we invest as well. We can invest direct investment with building owners themselves, whether it's a large building owner. You'll see we have a minimum requirement of about $25 million. So hard to get a $25 million worth of retrofits in smaller buildings. So we look to the larger hospitals, university campuses, et cetera. Also REITs. We did a deal with Dream REIT. They are a publicly listed owner of multiple buildings, a big real estate portfolio. So we've done deals with REITs specifically. The other major area we play is with aggregators. So you have what we call the ESCOs, the energy service companies, the Johnson Controls of the world, the Avenue Livings of the world, Ameresco. Those are all announced deals that we have done where we have provided them with a facility of CIB money under very strict conditions, and then they go to the market and will try to talk to the hospital, try to talk to the university, try to talk to the building owner to try and aggregate those projects to a minimum of $25 million. So there's a number of different ways that you can approach the aggregators in the market and take advantage of CIB money. And this chart gives you a bit of a map as to how we do it, who we speak to, the kind of firms that are out there. Here's a more focused look at what I just said. It's based on the number of dollars and who you might contact in the private sector. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, we sometimes get lost in our own acronyms. MUSH, we refer to as municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals. We call it the MUSH sector. So public and MUSH, that's what that last column stands for. The last slide I have is really an initiative summary. It talks about some of the things that I've already mentioned: minimum investment size, $25 million, project scope. It talks about that we're not interested in just, replacing light bulbs with LED light bulbs. They need to be meaningful retrofits. And as I say, the deeper, the better. We are also heavily incentivizing the inclusion of electrical vehicle charging infrastructure when buildings are doing retrofits. Interest rates I talked about, they're incentivizing deeper retrofits. And then we have minimum thresholds, just a few more tidbits about the program. There is a very good description, much more detailed than I'm giving you, on our website. So if you're interested in this project in particular, I would strongly encourage you to go there and have a look. So Paolo, I have a hard stop at 10, and I know that you have, again, 3 other great panelists. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there if that's okay with you.
Thank you so much, John, and we appreciate, and we will share your presentation by PDF more detailed. So thank you so much. If you want to stay connected, it would be a pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure. And just the last thing I'll say is, again, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. And I would encourage anybody that's interested to just contact me directly or send an email to the email address on the last slide. But we're very informal that way. We don't have like an intake process where we don't function like government. We function like a bank. So give us a call. We can explain it more to you. If you're interested, we can connect you with the right people. That's all. Thank you, everyone.
So much again.
Have a great day.
Thanks again, Meg. Thank you. Have a nice day. Martin.
Hi,
we are sorry we have a delay, not because we are in Italy, but this morning there were some connection issue. For example,
no problem. I'm okay. I'm okay to present.
Let's go. So do you want to I share your presentation?
Yes, please. I would appreciate that.
I'm here. 1 second.
So hello, everyone. Unfortunately, my Italian is not great and not sufficient enough to be doing this in Italian, so it's going to be in English. So my name is Martin. I am a strategic consultant. A little bit of a switch from John's presentation, which was on infrastructure. By the way, great presentation, John. I've learned a lot there. I want to focus on the medical device for healthcare in Canada. So I am a strategic consultant, as Paolo said. I do help enterprises, companies, small, medium enterprises navigate our healthcare system in Canada and commercialize their medical device. So this is what the presentation is going to be about. A little overview of our healthcare system. Like Paolo mentioned, so this is a great map of Canada to understand how wide geographically it is, but the population, like Paolo said, which I could understand the Italian, but I can't speak it. We really have 3 territories which are at the top north of the country, and we have 10 provinces which are all in the south. All the major cities are really at the border with the USA, which would be totally down there. So we have the federal healthcare system, and we have the provincial healthcare system. So here, what I would just want to mention is that it's mainly a public healthcare system. There's a little bit of a percentage of private healthcare for pharmacies and private clinics, but mainly our system is public. So you have to keep that in mind if you want to sell. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we have our federal body is Health Canada, like your European approval for your medical device. So in Canada, a medical device is any instrument or component used to treat, diagnose, or prevent a disease or abnormal physical condition in a patient. So it does not include the ones that are used for animals or for vet purposes. So just to make sure that when you're looking at what a medical device is for Canada, this is how Health Canada defines what a medical device is. And very similar to the European system, we do have classes, and you have 4 classes in Canada, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we also have 2 different licensing. So you have your MDL, we call, and I think John mentioned that we have a lot of acronyms. So MDL will be your medical device licenses, and MDEL is your medical device establishment license. Where do you need one or the other? We'll go with the next slide, Paulo. So one is if you have a class 1 device, you know, and you can look on the Health Canada website exactly what that is. Most likely it doesn't diagnose. It's something similar. It's very simple as masks or gloves. So that would be a class 1. You just need to have a license, an establishment license, to be able to distribute in Canada. Anything that is considered a class 2, 3, or 4, you need your MDL license to be able to sell in Canada. So, and then when you do your 3 and 4, I guess it's very similar to Europe. It's really your highest level of risk using like a implant, like a graft for a cardiac surgery or something. That would be a class 4 device. And then it's very similar to the Europe, but make sure that you understand, don't assume that your CE marking classification will be the same for Canada. There is some differences. So make sure you do your homework and make sure that you align with the Health Canada definition at this point. Next slide. So just a brief note on the supply chain, because the procurement system, how it works, I mentioned it's public. So you have the federal level for the Canadian business, where you're going to work for, if you have a product you want to sell to the military. The territories, like the 3 territories in the north of Canada, also going to be a federal jurisdiction. So you're going to have to deal with the federal. And then there's also things that are going to be for across Canada, which we call the federal government, which I think some of the pandemic requirements went through the federal. So, and then provincially, I mentioned there is 10 provinces. So the way it works, roughly, because it can be very complex, and I can talk about this and explain to you more in details. We have GPOs, Group Purchasing Organization. We have one in Toronto, which is HealthPro, that would be a purchasing and distributing your products. And then we have SSOs, which are Shared Services Organization. So sometimes you'll have to sell through an SSOs or a GPO, or directly through some of the hospitals, like the Western Toronto Hospital that John mentioned there. You could have a deal with them directly. And basically, our country is really, really big geographically. So the West provinces, so anything that is on the Pacific side all the way to the middle, so British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, it's centralized procurement. So most of the time you can sell to one of the SSOs, let's say in Saskatchewan, and they're going to distribute it, and it's going to be available for all of the hospitals within that province. Where the Heath province is, you have to keep in mind that it's more fragmented. So Ontario, Quebec, we're trying to centralize things, but we're not quite there yet because of the history of the way we were selling medical device. And then you have New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, that are also in the Maritimes, smaller provinces, but still there for you to maybe keep in mind if you want to sell your medical device to one of those provinces. So really, West and East have, I don't want to say different ways of selling, but your approach and your business plan will have to be adapted to those depending on where you want to sell. So Next slide. I'm going to focus on Quebec. So I sold everywhere. I've done strategic business development all across Canada, in the US, and some part of the of Europe. But I want to focus on Quebec just because it is the second biggest province in terms of population. So a lot of people that want to sell into our Canadian market will say, well, I'll sell in Ontario and Quebec because Ontario is the biggest one. So it's the second largest province. The language, the official language is French, which explains my very French name. I am from Quebec. And we have very specific regulations for tenders. So if your target is to sell your medical device in Quebec, once you have your Health Canada license and you want to sell in Quebec, there are regulations for tenders that are a bit different than the other provinces. So it makes it a bit more complex. But if you can just surround yourself with professionals and experts that can help you and guide you sell in the Quebec market, it's feasible. It's just, it might be seen as more complex, but just have people guide you through that. For example, Quebec is the only province that you would have, there's a regulation that it's on tenders. It's the lowest bidder that will win the contract. And it's the same for construction and schools and any other devices that you would want to sell. But if we focus on the medical device now, you have to keep that in mind when you're selling in Quebec and you want to answer some of the tenders that Paolo is looking at, the surveillance of your tenders. So, and the CAG that we, obviously it's Centre d'Acquisition Gouvernementale. It's pretty much our GPO, so our group purchasing organization for Quebec. It's been put in place in 2019, and they are in charge of anything public purchasing for healthcare, construction, and the education market. So it's one body that will be taking care of all those tenders, public tenders going on. So I know I went fast. There are probably a lot of questions, but don't hesitate or contact Paolo or me directly. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you have a medical device that you want to bring to Canada, I'd be happy to help you. You're beautiful.
Thank you so much, Martine. And of course, we will share the PDF. And if there will be more questions, we will address to you directly. So we will be happy to join you in the future for more consulting and for more suggestions.
Thank you very
so
much,
Martine. If you want to stay connected, or
I might stay connected while I'm connecting somewhere else, but I might stay connected.
So
I like to hear the Italian. So ciao, everyone.
Wonderful. Grazie. Okay, Taslim. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Paolo, are you good for me to just begin sharing? I know we're a little bit on a time crunch, so.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, we are 9 minutes late.
Okay, so it's nice to be here, everyone, and I'm hopeful that my presentation helps you as you build your business strategies for entering into the Canadian market, specifically in healthcare in Ontario. I thought it would be.
Sorry, may you put in slideshow, please?
Oh, yes.
Thank
sorry.
You. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's see. Is that okay? Can everyone see that? Yeah. Okay. I thought it would be helpful today for me to provide the buyer's perspective to all of you. I'm a big proponent of putting myself in my customers' shoes as I'm building my strategy and my business plan. So I thought that having the buyer's perspective and understanding the buyer's process and requirements that we must follow, because as you heard from Martine's presentation, healthcare procurement in Ontario is public. So there are very specific processes that we must follow from the buyer perspective, and in turn, sellers also need to follow these processes. So I'll start today by talking about the procurement process from the buyer's point of view. In any organization, before you can even start the purchasing or the sourcing process, you must have your business planning process complete and have your budget approval in place. Once you do that, you kind of move into this step right here that I like to call source. And this is where the sourcing steps are conducted, whether it's an RFQ, a request for quote, or an RFP, a request for proposal, or a direct sourcing opportunity. And when I say direct sourcing, I mean a limited tender. So this is broadly known as the concept of sole sourcing or single sourcing. There are a number of steps, just as a note. If in this case, a hospital would like to do direct sourcing with one individual, there are specific steps that we have to follow. We do have to publicly post the requirements for 14 days to ensure that there are no other companies out there that would be able to provide the good or service that we're trying to buy prior to entering into a sole source relationship with any company. So there are quite a few steps for sole sourcing, and that's just in order to push one of our mandatory requirements from our procurement directive, which is to competitively procure anything over $100,000. Once the sourcing steps are completed, everything else in the process is pretty standard to the world of procurement. So an evaluation takes place of any bids that have been submitted or quotes that have been submitted. A supplier is selected. Essentially, the highest ranked supplier coming out of the evaluation step would be selected. We would enter into contract negotiations with that supplier, and then move to drafting the contract and executing the purchasing and invoicing process. I pasted here at the bottom an excerpt from what we call the broader public sector procurement directive, and I've included a link at the end of my presentation to this directive. I was mentioning to Paolo when we were preparing for today's call that I think it's very important for any sellers that are wishing to enter into specifically the Ontario public sector market, that you understand this procurement directive, because we as public sector organizations are bound by this, and we actually have to attest that we follow and comply with this directive on an annual basis. Once you follow the link at the end of my presentation, you'll find yourself in section 7. That's the most important section of this directive that stipulates all of the mandatory requirements, the spend thresholds that we're required to follow certain processes based upon. This mandatory requirement number 3 speaks specifically to competitive procurement thresholds. And essentially, if you are procuring anything, whether goods or services over $100,000, you must enter into a public procurement process where you post a request for proposals on a public procurement website. Paolo, I did realize that I didn't include the links to those websites in my presentation, but I will share them with you so that you can share them with anyone who's interested. But these sites are where you would find any public sector organization in Ontario that would be looking to enter into the market for something. And that's your way to understand what people are trying to buy and how you can actually bid on work. Okay, I thought it would be helpful if I shared with all of you what we call typical healthcare procurement categories. Now, these are all the different categories that we buy goods or services for. I know there's a heavy focus on medical devices here for the companies that have joined. However, I thought it would be helpful to just share a general listing of the different categories where a procurement function would buy on behalf of a hospital. I'll talk a little bit next about the ways in which we buy, but I thought it would be helpful. So we are sort of split into non-clinical categories. So think, information technology, professional services like consulting or managed services, recruitment, facilities and maintenance, construction, transportation, these types of categories. And then we've got clinical categories, which is where the medical devices would fall into. Anything from equipment to supplies to referred out services like testing, linens, whether they're, scrubs or hospital linens for beds and curtains and whatnot, medical gases and also research equipment. Now, this part is, I think, probably what most of you are most interested in. I wanted to talk a little bit about how a potential vendor can enter into a relationship with a hospital. You heard from Martin earlier reference to GPOs and SSOs. A GPO is a group purchasing organization. So Health Pro is an example of a group purchasing organization that is national. So Health Pro has reach across Canada, and they also, as a result, have contracts that include hospitals across Canada. So as a hospital, so I work for Sinai Health. If we wanted to take advantage of any agreements that are put in place through Health Pro, we can do that, because there's language in these contracts that Health Pro enters into that allows hospitals to leverage them without having to go to tender publicly. The next path is an SSO. This stands for Shared Service Organization. Most hospitals in Ontario are members of one or more shared service organizations. Shared service organizations in general supply services for primarily back office functions for, in this case, hospitals. Anything from like finance to procurement to IT, those types of back office functions. Most hospitals are members of SSOs for support with some clinical focused sourcing. So generally speaking, if a hospital is a member of an SSO, they will have the SSO manage sourcing activities for the clinical categories that I shared with you previously. And the internal hospital function, procurement function would manage sourcing for the non-clinical categories in most cases. In these situations, if a vendor wants to enter into, or wants to respond to a bid for anything like a medical device, for example, you would essentially go through the SSO sourcing process and enter into the sourcing process with the SSO. The hospitals that are participating in that sourcing initiative would be part of what we call like a working group, where the hospital would be part of the evaluation committee. So hospitals actually are making the decision on which vendors they would like to enter into an agreement with based on the outcome of an evaluation process. But the sourcing activities are being facilitated by the SSO. Another avenue is the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services organization. So this is another method for entering into the hospital market. The MGCS has what we call vendors of record, or a VOR, in place for several different categories where multiple vendors are included as part of a VOR. These vendors that are part of the VOR go into the VOR via a sourcing process that includes an evaluation of technical requirements, pricing requirements, etc. And they enter into this VOR, whereby a second stage procurement process would need to be followed before a hospital could enter into an agreement with any vendor that's part of a VOR. A second stage procurement process would likely include a request for quotes or an RFQ, which would typically be based 100% on price, because technical requirements would have been evaluated as part of the process to be included on a VOR of a certain type. We have VORs in place that we leverage through the MGCS that are for goods, but also for services. Like recruitment is a really good example. And then for goods, anything, whether it's clinical or non-clinical, we often will go and take a look at the MGCS VOR listing to understand what our options are to accelerate procurement by simply utilizing or leveraging a second stage procurement process, as opposed to going through the longer first stage process, which includes posting publicly an RFP for 30 days. The second last option here is I wrote here other hospitals. Most hospitals will always include language in their RFPs or in their agreements that essentially allow other hospitals to leverage the outcome of either an RFP or the outcome of an agreement. This means that we're able to enter into an agreement directly with a vendor if that language does exist in that contract without having to go to market, because the compliance to the broader public sector procurement directive already exists, and those compliance requirements have already been met by the other hospital who has run the process. And then the last one again is sourcing directly, and I did talk about this one in a previous slide, but essentially we do have to generally publicly post our requirements prior to entering into a sole source relationship with a vendor. So there is still quite a bit of a process before we actually are able to sole source with vendors. This is just to ensure ongoing compliance to the procurement directive. The last thing that I'll mention here, and again, Paulo, before the end of the day today, I'll add a few more links to this slide so that this page can be shared with the group in case anyone wants further resources. But what I have done here is I've included a link to the broader public sector procurement director. This is a publicly available document. You can search it through Google to obtain it, but I've included the link here. The broader public sector procurement directive is one of 5 directives that fall under the broader public sector accountability act. So once you get to that page, you'll have to scroll down until you see the procurement directive link, and then you can go there. Underneath that link, there are also some helpful additional links that provide additional information just for your knowledge. But what you'll want to do is take a look primarily at section 7, which is the mandatory requirements of the procurement directive, and that will give you really good perspective of what the buyer in Ontario public sector is bound by and what processes we must follow, so that you can ensure that your business strategy from a seller's perspective accounts for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taslim.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, because there's many companies in Italy, they are doing business with Canada and Ontario and Quebec, but there's many other they want to know better and more how the system works. So thank you so much for your witness and your experience.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And if you want to stay connected, we connect with Mark. Mark, are you there?
I am.
Thank
you.
So good morning again, Mark. You can open your cam if you want.
Start video. Host has stopped it. I think you have to unlock it. Start my video. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Online.
Thank you. Good morning,
Welcome.
everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to an area that my group is passionate about, and that's all things facilities, buildings, operations, maintenance, life cycle. We all know, actually, let me just back up. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So I am part of Altus Group. We are a global firm. We operate around the globe in every region: Europe, Asia, South America, North America, and we are the parent company. Altus Group is corporate real estate focused, and my area is asset and facilities management. So a particular subject in this area that we're passionate about is, if you recall John Casola's, he said, remember 2 things, fill the gap. And there's a gap that we've identified over the decades that myself and my group have been in facilities maintenance. And that is looking at whole life costs as opposed to an annual budget or a monthly budget. And if you recall, Taslim, on one of your slides, and you showed the areas of procurement, non-medical, I was very delighted to see at the top of your list, facilities maintenance. And that will come up later on in the video. So two things that we like to point out is the strategy of looking at the whole life costs as opposed to what it costs me this month or this year. And I'll get into that in a minute. So what we find is that there's such a focus, and you see this in the newspapers. You'll see an announcement that a hospital is being built, and it's say a $2 billion or $1.5 billion project, and then you don't see a lot after that. There's a lot of focus and a lot of attention on the design and the construction, but when that hospital has been built, there's not a lot of focus on how it's going to be, or there's a disconnect or a gap between the construction and the operations. And those of us in my line of work have seen over the decades that a lot of times transitioning from the point at which a new hospital has been built and the point at which the doors open and we're providing clinical services to the public, it's quite a painful transition. To commissioning is a key milestone, and that goes beyond just handing the keys over and saying, yes, the lights are on, the heat's working, here you go. We also see in a lot of older buildings or non-P3 buildings that there's a lot of deferred maintenance. And you see this in older government buildings. Infrastructure is crumbling. That is one of the reasons that the P3 or public-private partnership model provides a lot of value. Our hospitals are built, they're not like other buildings. Hospitals are built with the expectation that we are going to be using that asset for 30, 40, 50 years or more. So with that, that's what we call whole of life. We know that we built a hospital. We know that we're going to be providing services to the public for many, many decades. So that's an important focus. And with that, so let's say you build a hospital and it costs you $1 billion. What doesn't show up in the newspaper is that it's going to be $1.2, $1.3, $1.5 billion to operate and maintain that building over its lifespan. So that's the basis of what I'm going to talk about today. And here's where the gap is. And this slide just shows, you've got capital planning, design, build. This is the part that's in the newspaper. But then the total cost of ownership, or TCO, there's much more cost that goes into the life of that building or that asset. So this is a slide that looks a little busy, but here, this green line here shows this massive investment in building a new hospital. And right around here, it gets built. And, over the life, you will make capital investments. You'll need a new MRI, or you'll replace boilers or chillers or a new roof. So this goes up and down, and it slowly raises over time. And then you'll get large investments where you make major capital investments. Those are capital projects. Now, the point that I'm making is that decisions made here determine premature or delayed failure. So and I don't want to get too granular and confuse anyone, but day-to-day maintenance is often disconnected from capital investment. If you invest $1 today in better maintenance or a maintenance strategy, you can save $5, $6, $7 in the years to come. So in other words, if you're not investing properly here, you get premature failure. If you are investing properly here, you extend this life of the asset. And we're talking about major components here. Now, minor components come into play, and that's part of the strategy too, is that you don't need to change doorknobs on doors that aren't critical because you think they're at 25 years old. You can use a strategy called run to failure. Whereas a boiler, a chiller, an emergency generator, if those fail, the entire hospital cannot be used. So that's a critical, and that's all part of the whole life maintenance strategy. So some points on design for operability and maintainability. Simple maintenance, whether it be procedures or the design, I won't spend a lot of time on that. Maintenance interventions. This speaks to how do we design so that when we maintain a component in the building, we're not interrupting clinical operations. And that could be through the equipment selection. It could be through the placement of the equipment. There's many other details that go into that. A big one near and dear to my heart is maintenance access. So in a previous role in my career, I was heading up maintenance and operations and life cycle for one of the largest hospitals in North America. It was the first digital hospital in North America. It was the second hospital globally to have what they call a command center. It was modeled after Johns Hopkins. That was one of the capital projects that we carried out there. So this is a hospital that got a lot of media attention, and yet we found ourselves just on the simplest of things, spending much more money to repair something because of where even as simple as where the equipment was located. And that is because through the project, we as a team, as a partnership, did not identify, again, just the simplest of things. And I'll give you one little example. So a fan coil or an air handling unit, just a small unit that heats an area or cools an area or provides airflow. If that had been put in a corridor instead of in a patient room, we would not have to remove that patient room from service to do maintenance and impact clinical operations. Instead, if we put it in the corridor, then there's no impact to clinical operations. And I could go on for hours with many examples of where we as an industry have missed the opportunity to design for operability and maintainability. And these are tiny little examples. I know I'm going into a lot of detail, but these add up to major costs. Another example I'll give you, and again, it's a detail, a copper elbow in a water line that costs $3 at your local hardware store cost me over $5,000 to change because of how much we had to do to get access to it. Working in a hospital with infection prevention control, when you rip out drywall, you have to hoard off the area, it causes interruption, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the point here is having input into the design from your facilities and maintenance experts or engineers. Builders are focused on building the building. Engineers are focused on what looks like the best way to do things on a drawing. And I work with these folks on a daily basis. But when we don't work in a partnership together, and in my area of the industry, when we miss the opportunity to be engaged early on, you can find those gaps. And then again, down the road, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, you're incurring costs that could have been avoided. We're working, a good example is right now is before the design is even finished, my team is engaged in a major hospital development on Vancouver Island, that's on the west coast of Canada, where we have input from the outset before the design is even complete. So that's an example of the right way to do things. Forecasting is important, standardization, modularization. I won't go into a lot of detail on that. Keys to success, a strategy, and again, that can start at any time. I read something the other day, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time to plant it is today. The sooner you can put a proper strategy in place, the better. Short and long-term planning, prioritizing, for example, and I use the doorknob. A doorknob on a mechanical room is a very low priority. A doorknob or access to the digital imaging department is critical, because if that door doesn't work, you've lost access to a critical function in the hospital. I won't spend much more time on this. Questions from anyone? Actually, before I get to that, there's another, I mentioned John Casolo's comment on the gap. Taslim, you identified facilities and maintenance. One other thing in procurement, we know that the procurement process drives value for money. And what we as industry, or what I try to help my industry clients with, is how to identify the lowest cost overall. So if you get 3 bids, you're going to pick the lowest price. One of the areas we try to help is through the procurement process. How do you procure in such a manner that identifies the best value, which will be the lowest price? So just another area that that we try to help with. Grazie mia. Questions?
Thank you so much, Mark. If we don't receive questions online, of course, we will forward to you directly.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your speech, very interesting. And now is the turn of our director, Marco Saladini, to close this session. And thank you so much to all the speakers and all the people in Italy that are looking for new opportunities in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of ground, thanks also to Paolo, who organized, and the colleagues in Italy that have been patiently supporting us also from the technical and content point of view. We definitely are keen on bringing more companies to the attention of the specialists that are in different areas, as we saw. I mean, procurement, finance, services and maintenance, and distribution and sales. I mean, so we have created a very effective network that we are keen to put to service of companies that are coming in. And I will switch to Italian now, so thanks again to panelists, anche perché abbiamo qualche diapositiva da mostrare rapidamente, quindi le metto su e se non mi dite nulla vuol dire che le vedete. Beh, innanzitutto abbiamo fatto un osservatorio che appunto è il DES Procurement, osservatorio gare appalti. Questo osservatorio riesce a produrre e proporre informazioni che sono naturalmente il sale, insomma, dell'attività di marketing e di prospezione dei mercati attraverso diversi canali. Ci sono le news sul sito dell'ICE, ice.it, ma anche altre sezioni specializzate che sono le anteprime dei grandi progetti da tenere d'occhio, perché sono selezionate e sono appunto tempestive, ma anche la sezione gare internazionali, dove naturalmente proponiamo una piccola selezione delle centinaia di gare che escono ogni giorno in Canada su diversi settori. E quindi le opportunità vengono pubblicate anche su gareappalti.ca, che è il nostro sito di riferimento, il nostro sito di bandiera. Vedremo poi le fonti che sono anche a disposizione di tutti ovviamente, e queste che mostriamo sono quelle principali, buyandSell.gc.ca, e questo è il sito federale. Ce n'è un altro che raccoglierà poi l'eredità, il testimone del precedente, che è canadabuys.canada.ca, e che è in corso di predisposizione. Questo è diciamo, effetto un'attività che era stata prevista anche nell'ambito del CETA. Poi c'è merx.com, questo invece è un sito web privato che pubblica un mix, diciamo, di opportunità, e che è molto ben conosciuto e molto efficace. E poi ce n'è un altro sempre privato, sul quale stiamo lavorando anche per trovare delle connessioni e fare dei web service per portare notizie sul nostro sito, insomma creare un sistema di segnalazione precoce, diciamo, di segnalazione tempestiva delle opportunità, anche attraverso gli altri canali che abbiamo menzionato. In accompagnamento a questo c'è una newsletter che è appena uscita, spero che tutti l'abbiano ricevuta, altrimenti fatecelo sapere, ve la mandiamo, vi includiamo nella lista. E naturalmente ci si può registrare sul sito gareappalti.ca e poi leggerla. È diciamo, un passepartout, un punto di vista privilegiato sul mercato delle gare pubbliche canadesi. I servizi che possiamo dare anche su richiesta sono tanti. Fra i tanti abbiamo selezionato questi che sono un pochino più attinenti alla materia, appunto monitoraggio e segnalazione di gare già aggiudicate, per capire appunto qual è stato il mercato in passato, come sono andate le cose nello specifico incrocio, insomma, settore territorio che interessa al cliente, che si rivolge a noi, all'ufficio dell'ICE ITA in Canada. Monitoraggio su attività e aggiudicazione contratti ad aziende italiane in Canada, poi contatti istituzionali, verifica criteri e modalità di partecipazione alle gare per diciamo, vedere se l'impresa è anche pronta, le carte in regola per poter fare un'offerta. E poi naturalmente anche servizi di ricerca contatti, come dicevo, sono quelli più gettonati, dicevo all'inizio, ma anche partecipazione a convegni, seminari, missioni e insomma tutto quello che è appunto di supporto al vostro marketing in questo specifico ambito delle gare pubbliche. Faremo una missione in Italia nel 2023 portando degli addetti di stazioni appaltanti, degli esperti di procurement, dei distributori. Stiamo ancora vedendo chi portare esattamente, ma insomma queste sono le tipologie di persone che vorremmo portare in due settori, che sono quello del trimestre corrente, l'ultimo del 2022, e quello del trimestre iniziale del 2023, quindi healthcare, impianti, forniture e dispositivi, ma anche tecnologie per l'ambiente. I luoghi sono ancora da definire, naturalmente speriamo che di rincontrare molte aziende manifatturiere, studi di ingegneria, fornitori anche di altri servizi professionali, e presentare loro le modalità di accesso alle gare, alle forniture, e stimolare un pochino la crescita del loro network, anche attraverso appunto il nostro aiuto, i nostri servizi. Io mi fermo qua, ringrazio tutti. Paolo, non so se ci sono altre domande, ma mi sembra di no, però restiamo in contatto, no?
Certo. Per il momento non vedo domande in diretta, non so se Dino ha ricevuto qualcosa dalla regia. Comunque informeremo per email tutti i partecipanti, quelli che hanno aderito in prima battuta all'iscrizione a questo webinar, tramite l'invio del link delle presentazioni dei 4 relatori ospiti nostri oggi.
Bene, grazie a tutti, arrivederci.
Quindi grazie a tutti, ai speaker, ai partecipanti, e alla prossima occasione.